Dave Thompson is a former Scottish Nationalist Party MSP at Holyrood. Having resigned from the SNP, he is a founder member of the Alliance for Independence Party. Greater Glasgow Pensioners for Independence invited him to speak to them about the new party, why he thinks it's necessary, what its plans are for the future. Pensioners for Independence itself as an organisation is non-party political. Asking Dave to talk to us is not in any way an endorsement of his plans, but it is a way for our members to become better informed about the options that will be open to them next year when Holyrood elections take place. So the recording of the talk is just coming up and we hope you enjoy it.
And I should also say, just to be clear, the Pensioners for Independence is an apolitical group. This is not an endorsement of Dave's views or such like. It is here as an educational, let's say, or information and gathering to allow individuals to make up their mind. Okay.
Right, thanks very much. Righty-ho. Now, just for a wee bit of background, I first got really interested in this about, I don't know, two and a half years ago, when the Scots Independent carried a big article about basically maxing the yes and maximising the list vote for independence. Grant Toms was the editor and still is. And that article really made me think seriously about this whole idea. I didn't do much about it personally for a while until last year, last summer, and there was more talk. I think it was when Wings was talking about starting up a party, and there was stuff in the National. I wrote a letter at that time, August last year, and said, I think this is a good idea. It's something we should discuss. That then led to a guy up here contacting me. We had a meeting, we had a blather about it, agreed to put feelers out amongst our own contacts. But then there were also people in the Central Belt. I'm based in Inverness. The bonny picture behind me, that's Lossiemouth East Beach, by the way. So you can come your holidays there rather than going to Spain. It's probably safer on the COVID. But anyway, unbeknown to us, there were other folk working away on this, and we got in touch. A meeting was called on the 2nd of February in the Central Belt. I think it was Clydebank. I couldn't go. I was on holiday in South Africa at the time, visiting my son and family out there. But I gave a quote, and my stuff was used to promote the meeting. Over 30 organisations attended the meeting. And there were somewhere between 60 and 70 folk attended. I can't remember the exact numbers. A steering group was set up. So from the 2nd of February, the steering group has been working away for over 6 months now, just developing the idea from that basic concept, developing the idea, looking at names, at slogans, at logos, getting stuff together to apply to the Electoral Commission, agreeing a constitution, which is not a simple normal constitution because we are not just any other political party. We've got various categories of membership that I'll briefly explain in a minute. Pulling all that stuff together and various other bits and pieces. We've got our social media launched, and we're working away on a website and other things to get all our ducks in a row to formally launch and take members. The Constitution took quite a bit of discussion because rather than just say to people, we are a political party and here are our policies, we had to work something out. So just join as an individual. We had to work something out to allow individuals to join, yes, and Indy groups to join, be they local or national. So a local branch of Pensioners for Indy could join if they wished. And to allow, and this is the crucial, important part of this, to allow other small parties to join. And this is a concept I think a number of folk are having difficulty in understanding, because we keep on seeing folks saying, the Alliance, it's just another party, that'll be 6 on the list and you're splitting the list votes 6 ways. Well, that's not the aim at all, and our constitution actually clearly states that. Our aim is to unite all the small parties, if we can, and we're hopeful, under the one umbrella, the one banner, so that on the list there will be the SNP. I'm sure they will not withdraw from the list, and probably better that they don't. It's better that they stand. And the other party will be the Alliance. Now, the Greens, the SSP, Solidarity, the ISP can all join the Alliance, and we'll negotiate some winnable places for them when they come on board. But we'll also be choosing candidates locally, and they'll be chosen by our members in each region. There's no top-down in the Alliance, it's bottom-up. We'll have 8 regional groups, and they'll be formally constituted, and they will actually choose local candidates to go 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th on their list, subject to whatever agreement has been reached nationally with other small parties. So if we can achieve our aim, we'll pull all the small parties together as one. Because as you know, to win in the list, you need about 5 or 6% of the vote. And all the wee parties on their own struggle to do that, apart from the Greens. We'll also only have one policy, and our policy will be independence. If you are a small party that joins, if you are an individual or a yes group, all you have to do is support independence for Scotland. When we get our MSPs elected, they will be expected to keep the SNP government in power, to vote, help them with their budget, and if there was a vote of no confidence, to keep them in, all to promote independence and help them develop that independence, however it happens, through referendum, negotiations eventually, and everything else. On all other matters, we do not have any policies that we insist that people stick to. We have a general statement that we're looking for a socially and environmentally just Scotland and a just world. So independence and that social and environmental justice, that's basically it. So if a candidate is chosen to stand, let's say top of the list in Central Region, by our AFI members in Central Region, that person would go along to the selection meeting along with others and say to our members, here's what I'm going to do for Central. First of all, I'm going to back independence to the hilt in the Scottish Parliament. And secondly, I'm going to be a local champion for the Central Region. And we would expect our MSPs all to be doing the same, in the mould, if you like, of Margot MacDonald, who was an independent, supported independence, got elected in Lothian, and then pursued policies that she had a personal interest in. The attraction of doing it that way is that we're not going to be torn apart by policy divisions like normal parties. We are, as the name says, an alliance. Now, if you look at the theory behind our proposal, there were just under 1 million people voted for the SNP in 2016 on the regional list, and the SNP got 4 seats. There was about the same number, just under 1 million, voted for Labour and the Tories on the regional list in 2016, and they got 45 seats, 11 times more for the same number of votes. And the reason for that is that the SNP did so well in the constituencies that they didn't qualify in the main for votes on the list, because the more seats you win in the constituencies, the less list seats you get. However, the Alliance, standing as an Alliance for Independence party, we will not stand in the constituencies. We'll be campaigning and asking everybody to vote SNP in the constituencies and helping the SNP get even more constituency MSPs. We'll be encouraging people who are yes supporters, but who might not want to vote SNP to go out and vote SNP in the constituencies. But with their second regional list vote, we want them to vote for the alliance. Because if we can get just a quarter of the people who voted for the SNP on the list the last time, just a quarter of them, we'll get 16 MSPs. So the SNP got 4 list MSPs for 1 million votes. If we can get a quarter of these committed independent supporters to vote for the alliance, we'll get 16 MSPs who support independence. So even if the SNP are looking like they might get some list votes, it's going to be tiny numbers. So they would lose these, so they might lose their 3 or 4, but we would add 16 or 20 or maybe even 24 into the parliament. And more to the point, every single AFI MSP that gets elected knocks out unionists in the main. So we would cut the number of unionists in the parliament right down to somewhere between 30 and 40. So you would have over 90 independent supporting MSPs in the Scottish Parliament. And the statistics are there and can prove what we're saying. The only time that there's a slight risk, a very slight risk, is if we don't get off the ground at all and we end up not being able to attract other small parties and stand and only get about 3% of the vote, like the other small ones, apart from maybe the Greens would get. But we're ambitious. We're not expecting not to attract people. We're not expecting only to get a few percent of the vote. We really are expecting to get all these committed independent supporters who voted SNP or didn't vote at all because they didn't want to vote for the SNP on the list to come over to the alliance and give us this huge number of additional independents supporting MSPs in the parliament. People can knock around the statistics in all sorts of ways, and depending on what you add in and what you take out, small changes can make big differences. If you look at the Highlands and Islands at the last election, the Liberal Democrats got Orkney and Shetland, but there were 27,000 people voted Lib Dem on the regional list in the Highlands and Islands and got no MSPs for it. If I was a Tory, I would be targeting that 27,000 Lib Dems in the Highlands to tactically vote Tory to get even more list seats for the Tories, because these 27,000 Lib Dems wasted their votes. And when you think about it, haven't the unionists been urging tactical voting for years? Ian Murray in Edinburgh doesn't get elected as a Labour MP because all these Edinburghers who vote for him are Labour. He gets elected because he's a unionist, and a lot of Tories in Edinburgh and Lib Dems voted for him for one reason: to keep the SNP out. If you look at Ruth Davidson's campaign in the 2016 election, her whole campaign was keep the SNP out, stop Indy Ref 2, and she appealed to all the unionists to back the Tories as the best unionist party. She appealed for tactical voting. And that's all we're doing. She actually succeeded quite spectacularly, because the Tory vote went up from 12.4% on the list in 2011 to 22.9% on the list in 2016. That's what gave Ruth Davidson and the Tories their huge number of additional MSPs. The result in 2011, where we got a majority on our own in the SNP, was a bit of a fluke. It's never going to happen again, because the unionists have twigged what happened and they benefited in 2016. So people that claim that we are gaming the system and it's somehow unfair to the Tories and Labour and the Liberals and the Unionists need to think about what these folk have been doing in terms of tactical voting for decades. They've been doing that to stop Scotland. And they need to look at the first past the post system, where Boris Johnson has a majority of 80 on just over 40% of the vote. You don't hear people claiming that Boris Johnson doesn't have a mandate to govern. You don't hear people claiming that Boris Johnson cheated in the election. You don't hear people claiming that Boris Johnson gamed the system. He didn't, because that's the legal system that he used. We've got a legal system in Scotland. We want the Scottish people and independent supporters to use it to chuck out the Tories, Labour and the Liberals, to put over 90 independence supporting MSPs into Holyrood and cut the Unionists down to somewhere around 30 to 40. So that's basically what we're about. I think I've probably talked long enough. I'm happy to answer any questions that folk have if they want to put them to me, because I've no doubt there's quite a number of points I haven't covered, and folk will be interested in asking me about those things. So.
Well, thank you, Dave. We have first question on the list. Parami, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I've got two questions actually. One is, why not just encourage people to give their second vote to the Greens if the real impetus is to get another pro-independence person? I would have thought they'd be more likely to get a seat than smaller parties. And the other one is more a tactical one, which is, if I were to give my vote to the Alliance, would I know who specifically I was voting for?
Yeah, these are two good points. As far as the Greens are concerned, we could have done that at every election up until now, couldn't we? We could have all given our second regional list votes to the Greens and turned them into a mass party of 20 or 30, but we didn't. Even although the Greens asked us to, and even although the Greens promoted that pretty heavily. So you have to ask ourselves, why did we not all vote Green on the list? Probably because a lot of folk might not have liked all of the Green policies. They might have liked some, but not others. So we just didn't do it, and it hasn't happened. And I can't see why that would change next year. So there's one reason why we wouldn't. The latest polls, I haven't had a chance to look at yesterday's poll in detail, but I think it showed the Greens actually losing support and losing MSPs. I think it would be to the Greens' advantage to join AFI and come on board, and we'll negotiate with them a number of winnable places. The advantage for them is they'd be guaranteed, if we can unify everybody, and that's our plan, they'd be guaranteed their number of MSPs that they negotiate, more or less. And the advantage for us is they would take their 150,000 votes with them and give the AFI a really good foundational start. So that's the first thing. On the candidates, it kind of flows on from that, because what you have to ask yourself is this. If you vote in the regional list, and I think yesterday's poll showed that in Highland, Central and Glasgow, the SNP would win a list seat, okay, a regional list seat. But if you're in any of the other 5 regional areas, the SNP will not win any list seats. So anybody in those 5 regions voting SNP in the regional list would be as well not voting at all. They'd be as well throwing their vote out the window because they're getting nothing back for it. So independence is the target here. So what you're voting for when you vote Alliance for Independence is for independence. After independence, I'm quite certain, and we're looking at this as a one-off for next year's election. We've no intention of carrying on forever as a political party. So if we can achieve what we're going to achieve, it's independence that's the important thing. Let's say we get the 4 small parties on board. So we would negotiate a number of seats for each of them across Scotland. So I don't know, I mean, it's difficult to give numbers at the moment, but let's say the very small ISP, SSP, Solidarity, who don't have any MSPs at the moment, they might be quite happy coming on board if they're getting 1 or 2 winnable seats through AFI. So at least they've got a voice then in Parliament. So there might not be an ISP or SSP or Solidarity candidate in our top 3 winnable places in your region, but they would be maybe in other regions. And the same with the Greens. But there's going to be a lot of spaces in there for independent individuals who AFI regional groups choose to stand on the election. And as we move into the election next year, there will be all the usual leafleting and party political broadcasts and messaging about what your local AFI candidates stand for. And at the end of the day, let's say there's a couple of individuals in your region, and let's say there's somebody from one of the small parties that you don't like. Are you really going to throw your vote away and not use it by voting SNP on the list, which is what's going to happen? Or would you rather vote for AFI to ensure we get 2 or 3 MSPs into Parliament in your region, even if it includes somebody that you don't like 100%? I know which way I would go. I'd want to stop the Parliament foo or independent supporting MSPs. And if there's 1 or 2 from the small parties that have policies that are totally adrift from mine, what's wrong with that? It's basically a coalition. It's bringing people together who support independence. And we will never win our independence if we don't unite. And sometimes uniting in politics, as in other ways of life, you maybe hold your nose, you know, but you work with folk for a common goal. You don't have to agree with everybody all the time in the different things you're involved in. And that's all we are saying here. And once we get our selection procedures debated at our conference in October, our members will actually debate that and agree our selection processes. We'll move into selecting candidates. So you'll see at the end of the year, the people that have been chosen to stand for AFI. And you'll see if there's small parties amongst that and who they are in your own region. And you can have a look then at what the situation is, and you can make your mind up at that time. Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. I've put myself next on the list since nobody else had put a question up. But it carries on from what you were saying about choosing somebody you're not happy with their politics. And I can understand what you're saying on the short term, just to get an independence MSP in the Parliament. But if it goes according to plan, we get a referendum next year, and then the Holyrood will be involved in the discussions to leave the union. That puts the independent MSPs in a very strong position, even before we even get to a referendum, because if they disagree with the SNP on which way they're going to get that referendum, there could be disunity, let's say, in the independence MSPs. And as I say, once you go on to negotiating coming out of the union, you're giving these independents, say MSPs, a lot of power. And I'm afraid to hold your nose just to get the referendum when the whole basis of becoming independent is up for discussion, that is, it's a very weak way of doing it as far as I can see. It's not the best way to say it, but yeah. You cannot guarantee what's going to be negotiated. At least with the SNP, if they're in power, they have their mandates and all the rest of it's to fall back on.
Yeah, well, there's 2 or 3 things there, Alan. The first one is we fully expect the SNP to get an overall majority in the constituencies alone. And the polls yesterday were showing that is what's likely to happen. If the poll leads that we've got now for independents and for the SNP are blown over the next 9 months, I'm afraid we're all sunk anyway. Game's a bogey. We've got to keep those polls up there. We've got to keep convincing people. And I've spent my whole life since I joined the SNP in 1965 convincing folk that independence is a good thing. If the Greens, let's say we go back to the original question about why not vote for the Greens and they can help make the majority, you've got the same problem because they can then hold the SNP to account. The thing is, the SNP are going to get such a small number of list votes that they're wasted. So let's say the SNP get 64 and they don't actually get an overall majority. And let's say that's because AFE has got over 20. And then there's the Greens as well, if they don't come on board with us, who would maybe have a few. Out of that 20 odd, I'm pretty sure, because we're not going to be whipping them on general policy issues, but we will be making sure that they support independence. We will not form any party policy position. Our individual members will all adopt their own views. You'll have a parliament with a big chunk of independent-minded people. But what we will debate in our October conference is the roadmap or the route map to independence, so that the folk who join us, our members, will be able to actually debate and agree the way forward. We're not there just to follow slavishly the SNP's route map. We're there to make the SNP think very seriously and very hard about the route map and how they go about getting independence, because they're going to be the main machine. We're just there to help them, and we're just there to get rid of unionists so they can't sit on the sidelines carping and putting down motions of no confidence in John Swinney and others who are doing an absolutely brilliant job just because they want to grandstand and try and create an artificial situation in the Parliament. We're going to throw out 20 of them and we're going to replace them with people who are genuinely believe in independence. And our local members will pick these people. So if you're in the Highlands and Islands and there's a couple of really good people that you want first and second on the Highlands and Islands list, who maybe have particular views on issues that are good for the Highlands and Islands, maybe they're interested in land reform, maybe they're interested in getting back to much smaller, effective councils. Who knows what policies these individuals will put to our local members to convince them to select them. But once they're elected, they can then speak in Parliament on behalf of these things. But independence will be the main thing that we'll be interested in.
My question's really about the Electoral Commission, because I have read somewhere that they may not register AFI because of only being for independence, because they might see that as just being the same as the SNP. So would you care to just comment about that? How, you know, what are they saying to you? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Anne. Yeah, we have had discussions with them. There was a face-to-face meeting before lockdown, and then there's been a number of exchanges by email and various things, and we've passed by early copies of our constitution showing what we were planning to do, and we got no untoward response from them. We're very confident that they'll accept the principle that we can unite small parties and come together. I think looking at the single policy issue of independence, they registered the Brexit party. What did it have? A single policy on Brexit. They don't query your policy positions. The Electoral Commission are interested in two things. One is, where do you get your money from and how you spend it? And the second thing they're interested in is that the name you use and the logo you use isn't confusing to the voters. Might confuse you with some other, maybe more established party or whatever. These are the two things the Electoral Commission is interested in. They're not really interested in the length of your constitution or so on, or your policy position in anything. So we really don't anticipate any issues around that. Obviously, we have to wait. I think it's been over 3 weeks now since we submitted our papers. They say they'll come back in 6. So we're waiting to hear from them to see what they think of our application. And if they've got any issues with it, they've told us they'll come back and they'll point out the issues and give us a chance to adjust our application accordingly. Hopefully we'll get straight through on the first crack, but you can never be sure with these things. But yeah, we've gone into that in great depth and great detail, and we're pretty confident we're okay.
Okay. Mary?
I mean, how likely are you to get all these wee parties to join in with you? I really don't think myself the Greens are going to. The Greens are going to see themselves as bigger than this, because the Greens have been winning seats. How close are you to bringing all these small parties together?
That's a fair point. Obviously, I don't know how many of them will come aboard. I'm very hopeful we can persuade them. I think as things move on and as we are formalised and start appearing in polling, and when people see, because we've had a massive response already to folk who are really keen on this idea, lots of people who are activists, political activists, not just SNP people, but lots of yes people who want to come on board and help us. So we're going to start off with a really good team across Scotland of activists, of folk who know what it's all about knocking on doors, know what it's all about leafleting, know what it's all about canvassing and doing all the really hard, tough work that a tiny, tiny minority of activists tend to do, even in the SNP with its 120,000 memberships. A lot of the old guard, you know, there was 4 or 5 that kept it going for a long time. And that's what won us at the end of the day. So we're attracting interest from a whole lot of these people. Now, we have had informal chats with 1 or 2 of them already, very informal, but they're keeping the door open, so they haven't said no. Patrick Harvey last week said no, and his reason? Because, my goodness, he would never join with a party that was gaming the system. So he said no then. But I think when the Greens realise that coming on board with us, they're going to maintain their current number of MSPs and maybe exceed it, whereas staying apart from us, they could quite possibly lose. We might not see the polling until quite a bit later in the year that would show that. I think maybe they would change their minds. So we're playing the long game here. What AFI has to do is attract, and I'll make this point again, people who are already committed to independence, who already vote SNP on the regional list. We've only got to attract a quarter of these people, plus a few more yes voters that won't vote SNP for whatever reason, and there are quite a number who can't bring themselves to vote SNP on the list. So if we attract that 20-24% of SNP list voters and a number of yes voters, we can get up to 16, 20 or more seats quite rapidly. And as people realise that, and as we get our public campaign going, because our campaign just now is to get ourselves set up, is to get our message out to folk who are politically aware and active. And the step after that is to get out to the general public. So we're at the first stage, we're moving, and we're into the second to an extent, but that will rack up as we move on through this year. And once we get candidates selected, those candidates will be campaigning in every single region. So I hope that covers the points.
Thanks for that, Dave. Next up on the list was Bill.
Hi, David.
Hi.
I understand the arithmetic here. I've done some calculations myself. for the northeast of Scotland, which is my region, and I can see that it works. But when I try to explain this to people, I quite often get the response, well, but what if the SNP don't do as well as they think they're going to do in the list, in the region, in the constituency seats? Are we not then in danger of, making things worse instead of making them better?
Well, that's a point, yeah, that I've had people put to me. And it's a point that the SNP themselves tend to make. But I think it's a very pessimistic and doom-laden position that they're taking. Because if the SNP don't do as well, if they drop back to the 2016 level and just get 59 constituencies and 4 lists, we're stuck in the same situation as we're in just now. We wouldn't have shown any momentum and increase, or certainly not enough to convince Westminster that they have to give us a Section 30. So if the SNP doesn't do so well, I think, as I said earlier, we're probably all sunk anyway. I'm convinced, and I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think that we could get at least, an eighth of the SNP vote on the list, right? An eighth of that vote, right? So if 6 of you out of this 50 or whatever here voted AFI, and that was repeated across Scotland, we would get a seat in every region. So we'd get 8 seats. Now the SNP might lose 4 seats, we would get 8. You've still got 4 more independents, MSPs, in the Parliament. So even if one person in 8 we can convince to vote for the Alliance for Independence, we're on a winner. And I'm sure we can convince a lot more than 1 in 8 who voted SNP the last time. That's what we're looking for. SNP or yes, who didn't actually get out to vote SNP. And if we can get a quarter, as I say, we've got 16. If we can get half of them, we're well up to the mid-20s and more. And I'm pretty certain if the Greens stood on their own, that we would still do well, because I think there's a lot of people like Mary who used their second vote the last time for the Greens because there was no other regional vote option that she felt comfortable with. She might decide to vote AFI this time rather than the Greens. And I think that out of the 6.6% the Greens got the last time, maybe 1% of that, or 1.5%, are people who are not necessarily happy with all the Green policies, who has about any party's policies. But let's say they lose one of that 6.6% and they're down to 5.6. Their 6 seats could very rapidly become 2 seats, or maybe even less. So they're going to have to think very carefully. They're going to have to hope that AFI does virtually nothing and doesn't get off the ground at all and ends up with 2 or 3% maximum. Otherwise, they could be harmed. If they come on board and add and unite with us for the good of Scotland, not for party reasons, then they could gain substantially. And that's what we'll be saying to them when we formally write to them after we have our formal launch and once we start discussions with them, if they'll speak to us.
Next up, we have Florence Sinclair.
2 questions, if I can. 1, how is it going to be funded? Because there's a lot of work to be done and leaflets, etc., etc. My second question is, if thousands of people vote, as you hope they will, for this new Alliance party, won't this be lauded by all the unionist parties as the SNP losing their power and make negotiations, possibly, although we assume they're going to be in power, make the negotiations much more difficult and much more likely to be hiccuped and real problems? Thank you.
Yeah, that's an argument that I've seen SNP politicians using. And when they use that argument, they're doing the unionists' work for them, I would say. But what we're hoping for and what the polls are showing just now is that SNP is going to get over 50% of the vote in the constituencies, which is up from 46 the last time. Nobody can argue that an 8% increase for the SNP is a backward step. So the SNP's legitimacy in the constituency vote and winning constituencies will be more than sufficient, especially if they get a majority in constituencies alone, will be sufficient to secure the SNP's position. The other stuff, I think, is just smoke and mirrors. It's people trying to suggest that somehow we are doing something illegal or dishonest and doesn't count. The unionists have already been at this, saying that the SNP itself must get a majority in the parliament. It's not good enough if the SNP, along with the Greens, have a majority in parliament. It must be one single party. Since when did our democracy require one single party to get a majority? If that was applied to Mr. Johnson and his pals in London, they would not be in power just now, would they? With just over 40% of the vote. So we can throw this right back at them. They're the ones that are undemocratic and have an undemocratic system and abuse and exploit that system. So I don't think that these accusations will hold water. Although I do believe you're right, they will make them. And at the moment, they are being encouraged by my friends and allies in the SNP, who should maybe think twice about what they're saying.
Okay, Florence, are you happy with that?
Yes, but what about the funding?
Oh, sorry,
Is the
funding.
party going to be funded?
We have no money. There's no rich backer behind us at the moment. It's a bunch of volunteers spent the last 6 months trying to pull this together. We're all doing it in our own time, as is often the case in independence politics that many of you will know about. And once we launch, we'll be taking memberships, and members will hopefully fund us, pay their membership fees. And as we grow, and as we hopefully attract maybe people who have a high profile, who knows, then I believe that more funding will come our way. At the moment, we're just working away. It's an idea which we think is a good idea. We're doing it on a shoestring, unlike our friend Gorgeous George, who's going to set up his Alliance for Unity party, who is linked in with the moneyed unionists and Tories, who'll no doubt have $1 million already in the bank to fight the Alliance for Independence. So ask yourselves this: why do they feel the need to set up a party in exact opposition to us? Why is it that John Curtis says that the Alliance for Independence could damage the SNP? Why is it that Willie Rennie reported us to the Electoral Commission more or less before we had lodged our papers, saying that they should ban us and not allow us to come into being because we were going to cheat the system? Why are these people so scared of AFI? Why are they so frightened? They're frightened because they know that we are right and we are going to wipe them out.
Next question from Jim Stamper.
One question I wondered about was where the SNP are likely or possibly going to get a list seat. Would you have candidates in these areas, or would you step aside?
Mm-hmm. At the moment, our policy is that we'll stand in every region, because we think we owe it to all the folk in all the regions to have the chance to vote for an alliance candidate. Yesterday's poll, interestingly, I believe, showed that in the Highlands and Islands, the SNP would get 2 list seats and the Greens would get 1. There would be 3 to independence parties in the Highlands and Islands. But the SNP would actually get 1 list seat in Glasgow. Now, I haven't looked at these figures in any detail, and we've got folk working with us who are much more able to do that than me, psephologists and that can crunch the numbers. And the SNP would also get 1 list seat in Central. So that means they're going to get no list seats in the south of Scotland, according to yesterday's poll analysis. Whereas if you look at 2016, the SNP got 3 list seats in the south of Scotland. So if we didn't stand in the south of Scotland, and yesterday's poll turned out to be the result, then neither us nor the SNP would get any list seats in the south of Scotland. So we don't know exactly we can't predict how the votes are going to fall come next year's election. And this is part of the difficulty. What we do know is above a certain level of votes, we are guaranteed to pick up a lot of seats. So we'll be standing in all the regions in Scotland, Jim.
Okay,
Thank
happy
you.
with that, Jim?
Yes, thank you.
Next up, Bob Ingram, did you want to ask a question?
If there is a sizable contingent from the AFI and a sizable contingent from the SNP, who's going to set the policies? Because there's a lot of the SNP policies over the years which has let Scotland down. There's been a lot of opportunity for them to take action and they've done nothing. Where would be the pressure being applied from the AFI? Which is really leads on to my main question is, why the devil don't you actually have a manifesto? Have a phase one and then a phase two where you actually say, we will promote certain areas for a manifesto.
Yeah, well, I think our reason for it is that our aim is independence, and we're hoping to get independence pretty soon. We're hoping next year's election is going to be decisive, and that within a relatively short time, and we're probably talking a year or two, we'll be independent. That's what we're looking for. And then we will have an election in Scotland, and I think there will be a realignment of a number of parties and different things until it all settles down, and we can all vote for parties with policies that we like. In the meantime, we're trying to reconcile people with a wide range of different policy views. So if we were to actually say we're going to develop policies on different issues, first of all, it would take us a long time, because every single issue you look at, you're going to have division and people with different views. Let's say you take even an Indy policy of something like currency. There'll be different views from people watching this Zoom today as to what we should do. So as soon as we would start, Bob, developing policies, we would start dividing ourselves. And there's enough division within Scottish politics already. And it's hard enough keeping people together just to create something like this without introducing the further development of detailed policies on different issues like GRA, for instance. We are happy for people to join AFI who are for the GRA legislation, and we're happy for people who will be against the GRA legislation. And we are hoping out of our, say, 20 MSPs, we'll have people with a whole range of different views on these policy issues. And we are happy for them to debate and put motions down and to vote on those issues as individuals, like Margaret MacDonald did when she was an independent MSP. And it doesn't actually affect independence, and it doesn't really affect the SNP because, well, I'll ask you to look back to 2007. Between 2007 and 2011, we were a minority government. We had 47 MSPs to Labour's 46. We went through the next 4 years and we lost a third of all the votes that we put to the Parliament. We lost a third of all the votes we put to Parliament. Did it bring the SNP government down? No, because unless you lose your votes on budget or vote of no confidence, it doesn't bring your government down. It just means you don't get that particular policy through the Parliament. We won 2/3, and we did that mainly because of Bruce Crawford, I think, and Brian Adam, who did a power of work getting the other parties, including the Tories, to vote with the SNP government on various policy issues that the SNP wanted put through. So policy stuff I don't think is anywhere near as important as independence. and we'll all have the chance to support whatever political party we want after independence to pursue the sort of policies that we want in an independent Scotland.
Thanks for that, Dave. Again, I'm conscious of time. Next up, Mariana.
It's this issue of the idea that you'd be gaming, the DeHont system. It was always intended to be, proportional. In other words, if you've got 50% of the votes, you get 50% of the seats, and that's roughly how it has worked out till now. So, I mean, if you were to get, say, if you got 55% of the votes and you got 55% of the seats, that's fine. But what if you get, say, as is suggested, 54% of the votes and say 64% of the seats by gaming the DeHont system? I mean, obviously happy for us, we'd all be delighted, but our opponents could well say, well, that lacks legitimacy. You have manipulated a system that's meant to be really quite fair and has actually been quite fair up till now. And so that's maybe making us hostage to fortune, that the legitimacy of anything that Parliament would try to do could be challenged. It could be said, well, I'm sorry, but I mean, you only got 54% of the vote. And I'm really only mentioning this because some people in the branch I'm involved in and local groups I'm involved in are a wee bit concerned about the ethics of this. But it's just that, it could make us vulnerable in certain respects to the legitimacy of anything we try to do in that Parliament. And I just wondered if Dave had an answer to that one so that we can argue back.
Yeah. Yes, I do. It's the legal system imposed on us by London, by Westminster. And it was imposed on us partly, at least, to stop any one party, i.e. the SNP, ever getting a majority. So I don't think there would be any legal grounds that anybody would have to be able to challenge us on what we're doing, because it's a legal electoral system. I think if people start that, and I know that the SNP are propagating this myth more than the opposition, they're doing their work for them, I think, which is a bit sad. But if they tried to say we weren't legitimate, they're already trying to say unless the SNP get a majority of seats in the Parliament, that it doesn't matter if the Greens added to them as a majority. That's neither here nor there. It must be the SNP and the SNP alone getting a majority of seats to give us independence. Maggie Thatcher told us a majority of seats in its own right was enough. We went down the referendum road. But if they claim that you've really gamed the system, it's illegitimate, and if we accept that and say, okay, well, we're going to be nice to the unionists and we're just going to give in and just let them roll over us on a huge majority in London, on 4 votes out of 10, which is only about 2 votes out of 10 of the population of the UK, then I think we'd be really rather silly. I think we just have to face this one. And if they question the legitimacy of it in terms of an independence majority in the Scottish Parliament, then the answer is easy. Well, if you think that our parliamentary majority, which is just as legitimate as yours in London, isn't enough, there's one way to test whether the Scottish people want independence. Hold a referendum, and then we'll see if more than 50% vote for independence. And that's maybe a good argument for sticking to the independence route rather than plan Bs, which I said we will be, discussing and debating later this year. That's maybe a good argument to say it reinforces massively the point about a referendum. So I hope that maybe helps to answer.
Well, legitimacy and legality are 2 different things. Undoubtedly, if we won in that way, it would be perfectly legal. We're not doing anything illegal, but legitimacy is the concept of the morality of the law. But again, instinctively, I just always feel that independence, liberty, freedom, it's something you take for yourself. It's not something that somebody hands to you on a plate. If somebody hands it to you on a plate, it's not freedom. It's some kind of clientage they're offering you. It's something that we have to do for ourselves. So No, I'm all with you in principle. I'm just trying to think of arguments that we can come up with, because that is an argument that will come up, because it's already coming up within my own yes circle. People are sort of saying, but is it no cheating? Will they not get us for that? You know, how will we say that we're no cheating?
I think we have to move on. I think last on the list is Robert Littler. You've been waiting patiently.
What it is, my concern is with the Alliance, is that in the last elections, the Greens were saying, and a lot of other people were saying, oh, the SNP are going to get the majority of the seats, right, of the constituency seats. That did not happen. So we lost the majority in that, right? So you need the list. There is no certainty that the SNP are going to get the majority of seats at the next election. The opinion polls say it, but what the opinion polls say doesn't always bear out. And I, for one, I'm not gambling with that. I'll be voting both votes for SNP, even though in my area it might be a wasted vote, but I'll be keeping that because I cannot risk losing the SNP as a government of Scotland, because the Unionists will love this, another political party, and they'll use it as a wedge to say, oh look, there's disagreement in the Yes campaign because we've now got another party standing against the SNP. Whether that's not true, but that's what they'll put over. And you can see what happened in Catalonia. As far as I understand, in Catalonia, there's a number of independence parties, and I read somewhere that they were busy fighting each other, arguing against each other.
Exactly, Robert.
They're not united. Right, Karen, sorry.
I thought you were finished. The reason they're fighting each other is they're not united. Our USP, our unique selling point is unity. Come under the one umbrella and work together. Draw the clans together instead of having them pitted against each other, you know, divide and rule and all the rest of it. Draw the parties together. The reason the SNP didn't do so well in 2016 was quite simple, and it came down to one major thing. The Unionists, the Tories, got everyone to tactically vote for them. And that's why the Tories did so well in the Scottish elections in 2016. They doubled their vote and they doubled their number of MSPs. And the situation in 2011 was an aberration that nobody expected, where the SNP got a majority in our own right. It's not going to be repeated. The Unionists have learned their lessons and they've united behind the Conservative and Unionist party. That's what they've done. We need to be as clever as them, and we need to be as ruthless as them as well. And we need to tactically vote to get rid of a whole lot of them, because what will happen if the SNP, if we don't stand, let's say, and the SNP end up with 69 seats, a majority in the Parliament with a few Greens as well, what will the other 50 to 60 Unionists do as we try and get a referendum? They'll oppose it at every step. They'll put down motions in the Parliament every single week. Once we win it and once we get into negotiations, they'll undermine the SNP government. What we're saying is, help us to get rid of a whole bunch of these people so they are much weaker, and there's only 30 to 40 of them and not 60 of them able to thwart the people's wishes in Scotland for independence after next year's election.
Okay, happy with that, Robert?
Yeah, that's fine. As I say, I mean, I don't agree. I understand what you're saying, but I still don't agree with it. I think it's a dangerous thing to do in the long term. But I accept your point of view. That's a democratic thing to do. Although I still disagree with a lot of what you're saying. I mean, thanks very much.
That's the whole point of these meetings, that folk get to understand what's going on and make up their own minds. And thank you for that, David. I don't believe there's any other questions in the